Alfred, thank you so much for making time. We obviously put this together in a relatively quick time frame because it sounds like the deadline for our H1B for the H1B process is coming up very, very soon, and we want to get more insight, help, etc., made available to clients and the public at large sooner than later. So thanks for making the time. I mean, maybe you could just start off with a little bit of background on yourself, and we can go from there.
All right, thank you so much, Harry. Hi, everyone. My name is Alfred. I am a counsel at Scale LLP, which is a sort of tech-forward, tech-focused law firm. We do a number of different sort of law firm things, one of which is immigration, and that's kind of my wheelhouse. So I deal every day with the alphabet soup of visas in this country that range from sort of H1Bs, which is one of the most popular and well-known visa, to everything to artist visas, asylum applications, marriage green cards, all sorts of things. Immigration is really fun because it really reflects real life. And because it reflects real life, it's also really complicated, technical, sometimes messy, and it changes all the time. It's very political. It's very subject to, federal changes. And, you guys obviously hear about it in the news. We have like theaters such as the southern border, but then there's also this kind of more technical and administrative side of immigration, such as employment-based immigration, which is the thing we're talking about today. The H1B is a really great visa. It's a really great visa, which is why it's so sought after. It's actually limited in terms of the number available every year. And it's so oversubscribed that there is a lottery that happens once a year. And the reason why we all met today or are meeting today is because the lottery is fast approaching. In fact, registration for the lottery opened up yesterday, and the lottery formally kicks off, or let's say the application to put your hat in the ring starts on March 1st and runs to March 18th. Don't worry, I have a PowerPoint. Everything's going to be fine. We'll go through this in a second, but I'm just kind of giving you the overview, lay of the land. But it's a fantastic visa. Employers like it, employees like it. It gives workers a path to a green card, which is obviously not a small thing. I don't expect any US citizens to know much or anything about immigration. So for let's say the US citizens who haven't had to deal with it, a green card is kind of the holy grail of the immigration pyramid. From there, it's very easy to get a passport. And in sort of legal terms, a green card is legal permanent residence, which kind of makes more sense in some ways. It means you can stay and work in America for freely or fairly freely and get most of the benefits accorded to US citizens. So all of this is just to say that immigration is complicated. This visa is very good. There are some pretty unique things about it because it's so good and so sought after. And I'm going to walk you through it so you guys understand what is this, what does H1B even mean? This sounds like a, Star Wars character. I need to, what do I need to do? What do I need to think about? And hopefully by the end of this presentation, you guys will have at least a pretty structural view of kind of what are the key elements? What do I need to do with it? This is especially important for hiring managers because immigration rightfully is kind of an annoyance in the hiring process for many people. And my job is obviously to make it as painless as possible. And in a way, there's good news with this is that I spend about, 10 months a year saying you got to wait for the lottery next year. And right now it's coming right up. So, there isn't much waiting necessary, which in immigration is kind of not something I say very often. So I'm going to share my screen.
Actually, if you don't mind, Alfred, before we dive into the nuts and bolts of that,
of course.
I figured a little bit of orientation. So, maybe not so much for, folks who do have US passports and don't have to deal with this as much. I've been fortunate enough to fall in that bucket, but then on the flip side, certainly seeing it from the outside in, having both sponsored green cards as part of AbstractOps, and also my wife recently became a US citizen through the green card and then the H1B and the green card process. So one thing that would be, I think, helpful is first, what happens before and after the H1B? In other words, what are the conditions one satisfies to or satisfies in order to qualify for the H1B? How long you can hold it? What happens after? You touched on the after part already a little bit with respect to the green card, so that's one from like a high level standpoint. The second is, I think, before we dive into the nuts and bolts of like how to navigate this process, why should employers
Yeah.
what are the pros and cons? What are the pains or lack thereof in terms of using H1Bs?
Yeah.
In order to like further your talent pool and so on. So just like from a high level framing exercise, that'd be great too.
Awesome. All right. Cool. So this is touched on in my presentation, but I'll kind of just answer the question directly here. The H1B is, it's a visa for specialty occupations. It's something that is super well suited for tech. It's something that is, okay, why a visa and why a foreign national in the first place? So we don't have to deal with this immigration alphabet soup for US nationals. Fine. Why are we going through webinars and pain processes of immigration to bring in talent? Well, foreign talent is abundant, and a lot of these jobs need foreign talent. There aren't enough Americans to do these jobs. I have the stat in my presentation, but I think there are like 1.5, if I'm not mistaken, I'll confirm in the slide soon, but 1.5 million tech jobs or computer related jobs open in America as of December of last year. So there's a need, right? There are roles. I mean, you guys are in HR, I don't have to tell you that. There are roles you guys need to fill, and Americans don't always fill them. And the thing that I think is great about this is that we're bringing in top talent. This is not just anybody. These are people who are really technically qualified, and the H1B is it's a specialty occupation visa, which means that these are people who have some sort of specialization and that requires at least a bachelor's degree. So they are super qualified. These are qualified people. So America decided we want to bring in the best from outside to fill our local needs and ultimately profit our companies. So everyone wins. I'll talk a bit about kind of the different scenarios or use cases for this visa and also what it leads to. So I think I'm just going to jump in. Can you guys see it?
We can see it now. Yep.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. So let's start with so this is the table of contents. We're going to go with like, what is it? What are the key elements? What are some of the numbers associated with it? What is the lottery timeline? Basically, the structure is, what is the H1B? How does it work? How do I get it? That's kind of, 3 big chunks. No legal presentation would be complete without a disclaimer. So, this is informational. This is not legal advice. Please seek legal advice, trying to understand immigration law very specifically. Like I said, immigration law reflects real life and it is very case by case. So this is a sort of thematic, broad structural overview, but this is not legal advice. All right, that's done. This is me, my contact information's here. I'm sure if you guys reach out to Harry or Ashley or anyone at AbstractOps, they'd be happy to share my email. I'll share it in the chat at the end of the presentation. All right, just some things. I'm going to use some words, technical words, throughout the presentation, hopefully. So I'll just kind of cover some basics. In immigration, there are 2 types of visas. There are temporary and quote unquote permanent visas. Those are called non-immigrant and immigrant visas. So it's just very helpful to understand that there is a distinction between, I can come to America for 2 years or 3 years, to do one thing, or I can study for a number of time, or, some sort of specific number. And there's, a green card or permanent residence, which is what Harry's wife has and a lot of people have, where there is no sort of end date. You're a permanent resident until otherwise. There are a couple different, so just in terms of jargon, there's a visa, which is what we're talking about. That's kind of the real thing in your passport. And then there's something called status. And status is the real key thing because your status can change over time. And status is, I am in H1B status. I am in student status. That's kind of the thing that really determines your sort of legality in the US. There are 2 broad categories of visas. One is employment-based, which is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. And then there's family-based, which is kind of, the marriage green card or, sponsoring a cousin or a parent and this kind of thing. I've already used the word sponsor. So the way the US immigration system works is that a US person or company sponsors, usually, a foreign beneficiary. So we have the US sponsor, so this would be the employer in the case of the H1B, you guys, sponsoring a foreign beneficiary, the person who benefits from the visa. The US agency that deals with immigration, there are a few, but the key ones for this one is called USCIS, which is the Citizenship and Immigration Services. Because this is an employment-based visa, I'm going to be talking about the Department of Labor a little bit, or DOL. at some point. And another term for application is petition. So I'll be saying that just so you guys are aware. All right, H1B, what is it? It is an employer-sponsored non-immigrant visa, which means it's a temporary visa sponsored by an employer. So it's done through work. It's focused around work and business. And it allows foreign nationals to work in a specialized field, specialized occupation for 3 years, renewable for up to 6 years. It's very good. That's quite a big chunk of time.
Just to confirm, is that for 6 additional years or
total of 6 years?
So 3 you start off with 3 and then you 3 plus 3.
And then 3 plus 3, yeah. There's an annual cap every fiscal year of 65,000 H1Bs. And then there's an additional cap for masters, for people who have master's degrees of 20,000. So 85,000 H1Bs every year. There's an annual lottery, like I said, and this is kind of why we're here. It takes place every March. I'll go through the dates in a minute. And if you're selected, you have 90 days to submit your application. Now, the key thing here is that everything is around the fiscal year. So something that's, just worth keeping in mind is if you get approved for the H1B, you get selected in the lottery, we apply, everything's fine. You find out in the summer you're in, it's all good. Then you can only start, the earliest you can start is the following October 1st. So it's a fiscal year thing. So the clock will start as early as October 1st. Now, what are some scenarios that make sense for an H1B? So let's say we have, a young grad who is doing their OPT, which is effectively it's optional practical training. It's basically a work permit that comes after studying at a US university or college. So if you are working in science, technology, in a STEM field, which is a kind of more scientific technical field, you get 2 years after your graduation. If you work, if you're an English lit major and you're not necessarily a scientist or an engineer, you have 1 year. But you get, a short runway to kind of test out the US labor market. And the idea here is that America wants to keep those, their new talent, their new trained brains. So, what if someone is ending their OPT, their work permit, and now they've worked for you and their work permit's running out. H1B is a great option to keep them on. What if you have someone who's already on a visa, but it's a kind of a short-term visa that has to either be renewed every year or, doesn't lead to a green card? This is a great visa to change them onto. What if you've been working with someone outside of America, and you want to bring them in and you think they're great? Or you have a young person who's great, but isn't quite, an extraordinary ability. They haven't sort of accumulated the amount of years necessary for their sort of professional background and everything. These are different use cases. Now, why the H1B? Number one, it has a high chance of approval. So if you make it through the lottery, it's like wildly high. I mean, it's like 97% high, at least recently. So it's very high chance of approval. The requirements in terms of what you need to get through the door, much less. Effectively, it's a bachelor's degree and a job that matches. Other visas like the O1, you need to really have risen to the very top of your field, much higher thing to prove. Up to 6 years in duration, which is a pretty big number. And you're able to change jobs. So employees like that because you're not limited to one job. You actually have kind of, the ability to change, and it leads to a green card. So these are all pretty great things. How does it work? So the way I describe it to clients is the H1B is basically, there's a triangle that we need to satisfy, and everything is linked to each piece. So on the one hand, we have a specialty occupation, which is basically a technical job. I'll go into that a little more in a second. You have the candidate, and their qualifications. So let's say you have a job for, an engineer, like a software engineer. You need to make sure the specialty occupation and the candidate's qualifications match. So if I have a job for a software engineer and I want to hire, Joe Smith, but Joe went to culinary school and has a degree in, pastries, or is a pastry chef, that doesn't really make sense, right? His resume doesn't match, his qualifications don't match. Same thing if you want to hire a graphic designer, but the person you're hiring is, a particle physicist. Not exactly the same thing. They're probably much smarter than me and could probably make some sort of argument as to how they're related. I haven't seen it happen. So, you really want the specialty occupation and the candidate's qualifications to match. Now, the third part of the triangle, the third sort of corner, is a prevailing wage. Now, what does this mean? I'm going to take a step back for a second and just remind you guys that there are two ways, there are two forms of immigration in America. There's family-based and employment-based. See, that sounds weird to say, but the US immigration system is designed to protect Americans, always. America first, Americans first. So the idea with employment-based immigration is that American workers will not suffer. Now, so what that means in this context is that you need to pay what is called the prevailing wage to the foreign worker. This means that you need to pay at least what a normal American in this job, in this area, and we're going to go into some more detail, would pay an American. The point of this is that hiring a foreign national doesn't depreciate the average salary for that kind of job. So if I hired 10 Swedes at half the rate of an American, then the job will probably, that job salary will probably go down and the American worker will lose their income. The idea here is that you need to pay what's normal for an American to be paid, so you don't pay foreigners a discount. Obviously, the employees love this because they get paid at least what's normal, which is great. But it keeps things fair and it keeps the playing field fair across the passport divide. So this is the triangle: specialty occupation, qualifications, prevailing wage. So what is a specialty occupation? It's some sort of expert knowledge in a specific field of study, and we need at least a bachelor's degree in a field related to the work, right? So you can have a bachelor's in pastry chef making from culinary school, that won't get you an engineering job, right? So it has to match. We need that, for a bachelor's degree to normally be the entry level requirement for that job, right? So if you have a role that doesn't necessarily always need a bachelor's degree, that won't really fly. You could also make the argument that among comparable employers, you usually need a bachelor's degree for this kind of job. Okay. Or you can show that, I have 3 of these jobs and I'm hiring, I have multiple versions of engineers, and every engineering job that I have in my company needs a bachelor's degree. Here's the ads, here's the contract, here's everything. And yeah, so this is the basic idea. Specialty occupation means something that needs at least a bachelor's degree. This is a non-exhaustive list, but these are some examples. Everything from a data analyst to a video director to quality engineer, acupuncturist, architecture. We should think about professions, right? So architecture, architect works, lawyer works. These kinds of accountant works, these are professions, plus these other sort of specialty occupations. Last year, these were some of the most popular jobs. You can notice a theme. The tech plays a pretty big role here. Everything from software engineer, developer, little assistant professors, architects sneaking in there, but otherwise pretty dominated by tech companies. Now, an H1B visa is valid for a single specific employer, right? There are some exceptions to this, but basically you need to work for an employer, and there needs to be an employer-employee relationship. This is really important for startups because I often get calls saying, hey, I want to sponsor myself for an H1B. And I say, well, that's not really how it works. Otherwise, everyone would be sponsoring themselves for an H1B. You'd set up an LLC and you'd make it happen. Here, you need an employer-employee relationship, which means that if you are a co-founder in a company or have a stake in a company, that's possible. That still works. That company could sponsor you theoretically, but the company needs to exert control over you. Effectively, or maybe crudely, that means they need to be able to fire you. You can do this in a number of different ways. I like to usually have the beneficiary, i.e. the foreign national who wants to be sponsored, have probably less than 50% stake in the company. You could have a board of directors, different mechanisms that show that there is a bit of a separation of entities in the company. Then that's possible, but you need that employer-employee relationship and that control. It's important for employers to know that there are some regulatory requirements that you guys need to do. You need to pay that prevailing wage, or whatever the actual wage is for the job. So let's say you have 3 software engineers and you hire a foreign one. The foreign one needs to be paid what the other ones are being paid. So yeah, I mentioned that already. You need to ensure the working conditions do not adversely affect similar workers. Again, this is about keeping the playing field level, not bringing the new foreign person and kind of, depreciating the way things are at your company. You need to provide notice. There are some technical regulatory things. This is part of the lawyer's role. We'll guide you through everything so you don't mess anything up. You need to have a public, access folder in case you get audited. And, in case you fire or somehow the employment gets terminated, you need to, by law, provide a ticket back to their country. So the prevailing wage is that kind of floor that we were talking about. It's not some arbitrary number that me or Harry or someone makes up. It's something that's usually based on Department of Labor statistics for employment, based on job title, based on the level of seniority, and based on the physical location. So if I'm a software engineer in San Francisco, I will probably earn a different number than if I'm a software engineer in Topeka, Kansas. And that's a product of the markets and, I guess, wages and a bunch of sort of economic factors. I keep saying prevailing wage, and just to define that, I think I've more or less paraphrased it, but it's the weighted average of wages paid to similarly employed workers in the same geographic area, right? So what we're going to do is we would look at the job. We would look at the job where it's advertised, where you want the person to work. If it's a remote job, where would that person physically be working? And we would tie that to this wage classification. So then we would find a number saying we need to pay at least this amount. And I use, again, Department of Labor sort of statistics for this. Again, I said that there is a cap every year of 85,000. That's 65,000 a year plus the master's cap of 20,000. So there are 85,000 H1Bs a year. Some jobs actually are exempt from the cap. These are pretty great jobs. They're not always applicable to conversations like this because they're for higher ed institutions, they're nonprofits, research organizations, government research. Just so you guys know that it exists. I just wanted to sort of share that for completeness. And now, by the numbers. We said 85,000 H1Bs a year, fiscal year. Last year, almost 400,000 people applied. So you guys can see the rates. There is a 97% approval rate for petitions selected in the lottery. Trump, not a big fan, arguably, of immigration generally. I won't get into that too much, but H1B, he pushed pretty hard on, actually. So there was a much lower rate of approval. And since in the current administration, those approval rates have bounced back. So things are looking good for H1Bs. The climate is positive. Again, this is a specialty occupation. A lot of people have masters. These are pretty technical fields. It's a competitive field. There might be a lot of job openings, but there are a lot of qualified people. 64% of beneficiaries had a master's degree. Like I said at the top of the call, Harry asked a great question, what is the point of this? And it's, there's a lot of demand for these kinds of roles. And there's a lot of foreign talent out there. And this is a good way to bridge, to help US companies bring in the world's best talent. A lot of these jobs are in tech. Tech obviously pays fairly well. Just for your, ideas, median annual compensation for H1B is 101K. That varies depending on the role, but just, so you know. And statistics show that H1B employers also are most likely to create jobs for Americans as well. So these are high, people wanting to sponsor on H1Bs are also just creating jobs all over the place. So that's just, in case people push back against employment-based immigration. And now, the fees for this, when I read this, I was a little shocked. It ranges from, let's say, 5K on the low side to 30K on the high side. I've never seen anything close to 30K, but I guess anyone likes to pay a lot of money for anything. So it's possible. My firm certainly charges on the lower end of that scale and is very competitive in that. And there are 2 sets of fees, I would say. One are government fees, and then there are attorney fees to help you. Government filing fees, let's say administrative fees. All right, how does this work? This is the lottery timeline. So yesterday, the registration, the electronic portal became active for employers to create accounts. It's really important that if you guys are interested in doing this, that you contact me right away. The clock is ticking. We need to get you guys registered. We need to have you guys link your accounts to, if we work together, mine or another attorney's, to get everything set up for the registration period or the lottery, which runs from March 1 to March 18. These dates change every year. So, this is kind of a software expires soon, so to speak. So March 1st to 18, that's where all the employers put their candidates in the ring. By March 31st, you'll receive your yay or nay from USCIS. And starting in April will be the earliest time a physical H1B petition can be submitted. The latest time to submit an application is 90 days after you were selected for the lottery. So that's the timeline. This is possible. It is by no means going to be kind of, a smooth strut to the finish line. This is going to be a bit of a race, but it's definitely possible. Again, these visas are great and they're worth it. Frankly, the cost of the visa is fairly low for the caliber of candidate that often is hired and for the value created, obviously. What's interesting with this electronic lottery is that, at least in the past couple of years, there have been multiple electronic lotteries. So what happens is there's a cap of 85,000. So they send more or less 85,000 approved, yes, you've been selected to the lottery. Not everyone applies. Not everyone makes it through the lottery. Some people aren't eligible. Some people's jobs don't make it. Not everyone makes it through, which means that there are going to be some extras down the line, some crumbs that fall through. What they've done in the past couple of years is they reopened, or not reopened, if you haven't been rejected yet, you could get an approval later down the line, which is pretty great. So, if some people don't apply or they miss their 90-day window or whatever happens, there is a chance that if you don't get the nod by end of March, you could get, kind of waitlisted, that kind of idea later on in the summer, which is fantastic. Premium processing exists. What is that? Immigration is a slow process. It is something that includes processing, and government plus processing doesn't always equal fast, efficient service. It's been in the news, but I have a stat on this that, I think there's a backlog of like 3 million applications, huge backlog in immigration. The processing time for an H1B can be quite a few months. Premium processing is a great way at a relatively low cost. If you think of the median salary, it's just 2% of that, to rush the processing, which means that you get your answer within 15 days of submitting the petition. This is an optional fee. It goes straight to the government. Most clients, just for transparency, most clients opt to do premium processing just for, there's clarity, there's no waiting, you can make decisions if things work out or don't. And yeah, so that's an option. It's a pretty good option. Not all visas have that. So what do we need? We being me and similar attorneys, from you guys, from the employers, we will need, your EIN numbers. And if they haven't been approved by the Department of Labor, that's something that the attorney would help you get done. We're going to need to work the job title. Again, if you think of the triangle, we need the job and to align. We need for that to make sense. So we're going to kind of figure out what is the job title that fits with the right wage, that fits with the right candidate, and make sure these three different points of the triangle, sync up and make sense. That's something that lawyers will work on with you. We'll be collecting company documents. We'll be collecting some marketing information, tax records, and we'll create a USCIS account for you. We need to do that. So then I can, immigration lawyers like me can represent you and help you through the process. Like I said, there are two different fees. There are government filing fees, which range between those two numbers, or attorney fees. Premium processing is also available. From the foreign national, we'll need their resume, we'll need diplomas, transcripts. Immigration is like an elephant. It remembers everything and it wants to know everything every step of the way. So every time a foreign national has some sort of interaction with immigration, you should really have all of their history. So that's something that I always ask for. And, because this visa needs a US bachelor's degree or its equivalent, you need to show that in case a foreign national has a foreign bachelor's degree, that it's equivalent. And you get that through education evaluations. All right, so I'm going to go through a couple different letters of the alphabet soup here just to give you an idea of related visas. There's H1B for new employment, which is kind of what we're talking about here. For continuing employment, so that's the kind of renewal. Very often, you can transfer in H1B. So I mentioned at the beginning, that's one of the advantages. You can change employers on an H1B. I've done that for AbstractOps before for a number of different clients, and that's another option. So let's say you don't get a candidate selected at the lottery, but let's say a foreign national is on an H1B or just gets an H1B this year and starts with another employer, but then would like to be hired by an AbstractOps client. Perfect. You can transfer that H1B over to you guys, which is pretty cool. H4, dependent visas, that's for spouses and children. If you're hiring someone from Chile or Singapore, this is very specific, and again, immigration is very weird. There are a lot of trade treaties or sort of bilateral agreements between the US and other countries. The next two are examples of them. So there was a trade accord between Chile and the US and Singapore and the US, and they created this little H1B1, which is a great kind of fast-tracked, simplified H1B. It's great. If you have candidates who are Chilean or Singaporean, perfect. That's that simplifies the process. Same thing for Australians. Similar, there's a different letter, but it's a similar process to the H1B, and it's somewhat simplified. Another great option. If you don't get the H1B, there's some other options, one of which is this O1 visa, which is this extraordinary ability visa. Again, it's a much higher bar to get. It's kind of, you have a lot of documentation to prove, but it does get you a 3-year visa that's renewable, which is great. There are L visas, which are you can transfer people from outside, from the same company, but in a foreign country. So let's say Amazon Luxembourg transfers to Amazon US. That's an example. There are some conditions there, like they have to work for that company for at least a year overseas to qualify. And then there's this kind of NAFTA visa, which is the TN visa, which works for Canadians and Mexicans. Again, these are good visas. Some are hard visas. Some are, great. Not all of them offer all the things that the H1B offers, which is path to a green card, a pretty long duration, good runway, all of that. But they are good options. Like I said, premium processing is available and should definitely be considered. When you are processing, there are 2 different ways you can do that. One is with foreign nationals in America, or people doing it outside through the consulates. It's both have their advantages and disadvantages, and that's something I can talk through with you guys, on a case-by-case basis. My advice is if people are in processing or are pending their application for the green card, probably not to travel. I mean, I would certainly advise them not to travel. COVID restrictions have been crazy and it changes all the time. I don't want someone to get stuck outside. Also, there's a huge backlog at many embassies overseas. So that's kind of something ideally to avoid. And like I said, I mean, this is subject to change at any time. It changes all the time. But the COVID, just being mindful of the COVID travel requirements, that foreign nationals need proof of full approved vaccinations, or actually anyone entering, and a negative COVID test. There's some small exceptions, but not really.
Before we continue, Alfred, so we have 5 minutes left, and I'm mindful of time. How far do we have left in this, and can we save some time for questions?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I guess what I will say here is, the lawyer's role is to really, help you with electronic registration, is to, help with the Department of Labor application, that prevailing wage, make sure you cross all your T's and dot all your I's, and basically guide you through the process. There are 2 big paths that you guys can take. One is to play the lottery and then see what happens. If you get selected, then we move forward. If not, you don't have to pay for the petition because we haven't done it. We kind of take care of that first part. Or there are, or we can create the full petition up front, whether you get selected or not. That is particularly useful for if you're hiring someone who is coming off of a student visa or their OPT. That's a sort of technicality, and that is pretty important. But I'm mindful of time, and thank you, Hari, for saying that. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I have the one to just kick it off, which is, are Are there different rates of getting approved and getting selected for the lottery depending on where you're coming from? So for example, are OPT candidates more or less likely to actually get selected in the lottery?
No. So it doesn't matter where you're from. It doesn't matter. Yeah. As long as you qualify and you're selected, then you should be looking good. The approval rate.
So in other words, it's like a roughly 20% chance, no matter what your context is.
Again, it's roughly 20%, but at the same time, there is that master's cap, and you do have a slightly higher percentage if your candidate has a master's degree.
Got it.
This is a lot, guys. So I'm just mindful that I don't really expect anyone to fully kind of grasp this right away. It's very technical. It's a little confusing, especially for people who have been fortunate enough not to deal with immigration in the past.
We'll definitely share transcripts and put it up on our website along with the recording of the video. So hopefully those things should help people digest the information on their own time. And is there a presentation or something like that we can share in tandem with that as well?
One more time?
Would we be able to put up the presentation that you shared today in tandem with that as well?
Yeah, I'll share that. So what are the common reasons for the H1B transfer to be denied? Well, again, it's that triangle, right? So if you are in H1B status, you're approved for a specific role. For me, an H1B transfer so I'll step back. What is an H1B transfer? An H1B transfer is what you would call a change of employer. Usually it's some sort of thing that has changed significantly in your previous H1B. So if you are a software engineer in San Francisco and you are approved to work, let's say at IBM, and you get a job working at, I don't know, TransferWise or something, you would change employers. The thing that I would need to see, and the thing that could be tricky, is that if the job is very different to the previous job, that's kind of a, not necessarily a red flag, but it's kind of like, what's going on here? Why is this so different? We would need to see that the qualifications match and that you are indeed specialized and able to do this job. And we'd need all the company documents to be in order. Effectively, it's kind of reapplying for an H1B. It's just you don't have to worry about the lottery and the cap. But again, that triangle is really the thing that we need to be mindful of. So I like to, for transfers, I think it's very important that the jobs are similar and the story can be consistent.
So on the point you mentioned on, whether to do it in 2 steps or 1 step, in other words, like preparing the whole application or just preparing the initial lottery submission, how long does it take to assemble and prepare the documentation for the petition process after the lottery? So what is the reason to want to do both upfront rather than chopping it up into 2 pieces?
Great question. So first one is that it's just security. There's just the general thing of having everything ready to go. And if you're selected, you don't have to scramble and get everything put together. Everything's kind of already set. So that's, I think, the one kind of just prudence, I would just say, on the one hand. There is a very specific and very important use case for doing the upfront application. And that is something called cap gap. This is, again, a very weird term. I'm just going to reshare my screen for a second. Okay, you guys should be able to see that. Now, like I said, a big use case for the H1B are students. And students, after you graduate, you're allowed either 12 or 24 months, depending on your degree, sort of a work authorization after your studies. And graduations usually happen in about May, June. And so if you think about 12 months after May or June, that expires kind of in May or June of the next year. Now, if you remember, an H1B starts at the new fiscal year, which is October. So what that means is that there's a gap in the middle between your work authorization or the end of your OPT, the end of your period of work, and the beginning of the H1B, which means that there's a gap in the middle, and that's a problem. You can't work without authorization in America. That's a very big no-no. To bridge this gap in the cap, let's say, the lottery cap, to bridge that gap, there is something called cap gap. I'm so sorry, these words are so annoying. And effectively, this is the kind of use case for doing an upfront application, because you are able to stay in America working uninterrupted if you submit your H1B application before the end of your OPT or before the end of your work authorization. So, this is very important. When you study as a foreigner in America, you get 12 or 24 months to work in America. You also get a 60-day grace period after that work authorization, or what's called OPT. You need to submit the application before that grace period, so really in the OPT. And if you submit, and you should probably add premium processing so that the date works out. If you submit and are approved, then you can continue uninterrupted on your H1B, which is great. So that's a really good use case. And that's something I would really encourage people, employers, to do if they're trying to hire someone who's wrapping up their OPT.
Thank you, Alfred. We're a couple minutes over time, so we'll thanks to folks for joining. We'll make sure to put this up for easier access after the fact. And really appreciate you sharing some of the intricate nuances and tricky components of this with our audience. And looking forward to continuing to work together on supporting our clients and the early stage startups at large.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hari. I just put my email in the chat, and thanks to everyone for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.